Hello guys, welcome back to our humble abode,
BLDG Productions.
Alright, so for today we are going to have our basic Spanish tutorial again. So it's quite a long time that we didn't have this Spanish tutorial. Alright, so let's start. So if we are going to talk about past action, or I mean past habitual action, what tense of the verb are we going to use?
Simple past tense or imperfect past tense?
Are you sure with that? Simple past or imperfect past tense?
Let us see.
Alright guys, so we are going to use the imperfect past tense when we talk about actions in the past that we did habitually. So we call this PRETERÍTO imperfecto. Alright, so fasten your seatbelt and let's get started. Alright guys, so we're back. So let's see first the difference between a simple past tense and imperfect past tense. So of course, if we are sure about past events, then we are going to use the simple past tense. But what about an imperfect past tense? So we'll try to see the difference between these two tenses, the simple past and the imperfect past tense. So let's have some sentences. For example, a simple past tense. When I visited my grandparents.
Cuando yo visité a mis abuelos.
Alright, so the verb there is visite in the first person. It means like I visited. Alright, so that is simple past tense. Let's also have an example of an imperfect past tense. When I used to visit my grandparents.
Cuando yo visitaba a mis abuelos.
Alright, so the verb there is visitaba in the imperfect past tense. But in the simple past tense, it's visite. Alright, visite, visitaba. Let's have another example of a simple past tense. I ran last weekend.
Yo corré la semana pasada.
Run.
Corre, I ran. Yo corre. What about its imperfect past tense? I used to run every weekend.
Yo corría todos los fines de semana.
So the imperfect past tense for used to run is yo corría. So you would notice the difference there. Yo corre in the simple past tense and yo corría in the imperfect past tense. I hope you have some ideas now between these two, the simple past tense and the imperfect past tense. But for today, guys, we are going to focus more on conjugating or formulating sentences with the imperfect past tense. Alright guys, so when are we going to use the imperfect past tense? So this would serve as our guide when we use this kind of tense. So the first one is imperfect past tense is used to speak about past actions that were habitual. So the things that you used to do before. Alright? Number 2. So we use the imperfect past tense when we talk about ongoing past action that was interrupted. Alright, so the third one is we are going to use the imperfect past tense when we describe about past characteristics. Let's take for instance your age, height, time, and so on and so forth. Number 4 is if we describe about past conditions. So if you are narrating story for instance, then we may use the imperfect past tense. And number 5 is we use the imperfect past tense when we describe about our past feelings. Alright, so maybe these things, these 5 are our guides to be able to use properly and correctly the imperfect past tense. Let's have some more sentences to understand more about this type of past tense, the imperfect past tense. The first one, Narinli used to talk about foods in her vlogs.
Narinli hablaba sobre comidas en su blog.
So this sentence talks about a habitual state or event or action in the past. So this is an habitual action. Alright. Another sentence. At 10 years old, Jules May was very shy and didn't have many friends.
A los 10 años, Jules May era muy tímida y no tenía muchos amigos.
This sentence also shows an imperfect past tense. It describes something in the past. So the verbs in the imperfect past tense used in this sentence are tenía and era. So era from the verb ser and tenía from the verb tener. Era means like was and tenía means had. That is tener in the past tense. Let's have some more sentences about imperfect past tense. I saw in the Ruth channel when I was at the church.
Vi a Inday Ruth Channel cuando estaba en la iglesia.
Alright, so this sentence gives details about the circumstances of an action in the place. So when, where, how, or why something took place. So we are going to use the imperfect past tense if we give details also about in the past. Okay, another sentence. Mylene Angelo 18 worked while Hannah Molina studied.
Mylene Angelo 18 trabajaba mientras Hannah Molina estudiaba.
Alright, so when we are talking about actions or events taking place simultaneously in the past, then we are going to use the imperfect past tense. Last sentence. The girl was called Ramos Esme and she had 2 friends.
La niña se llamaba Ramos Esme y tenía 2 amigos.
Alright, so the verbs used there, the imperfect past tense, we have llamaba and tenía. Alright, so she was called, se llamaba, she had, tenía. Alright, so this sentence describes or provides a background in a narrative. So if you are going to narrate also some stories, then the imperfect past tense can also be used, okay, to give a narrative about certain situation. Let's have some more sentences. So the following sentences talk about dates, time, age, condition, and feelings. So if we are going to talk about these topics or these things, then we are going to use also the imperfect past tense. Example, when I was 11 years old, we moved to Spain.
Cuando tenía 11 años, nos mudamos a España.
Tenía. We moved, nos mudamos. It was summer when we went to Spain.
Era verano cuando fuimos a España.
It was era. When we went, cuando fuimos. Alright, so this talks about date and time, so we are going to use also the imperfect past tense. I felt happy with my boyfriend.
Me sentía feliz con mi novio.
Felt happy or I felt happy, me sentía. So when you talk about feelings, okay, in the past, then we are going to use also the imperfect past tense. Let's take the last sentence. I was taking a bath when my cell phone rang.
Me bañaba cuando el móvil sonó.
I was taking a bath, me bañaba. Alright, so these are examples of sentences and the details when we are going to use the imperfect past tense. Let's move on. Now, how are we going to conjugate the verbs in the imperfect past tense? Alright, let's start with the regular ones. So let's try to conjugate regular AR verbs. To play,
Jugar.
I used to play.
Jugaba.
You used to play.
Jugabas.
He or she used to play.
Jugaba.
We used to play.
Jugábamos.
You plural used to play.
Jugabais.
They used to play.
Jugaban.
Muy bien. Do you notice something with their terminals or their endings when we conjugate verbs, AR ending verbs, regular?
Sí, normalmente terminan en aba.
Alright, so these AR ending verbs, regular verbs, end with
Aba, abas, aba, abamos, abais, aban.
Alright, so take note of those endings for regular AR ending verbs. Let's move on to ER ending verbs. So let's take, for instance, the verb which means to eat.
Comer.
Comer. Okay, comer, to eat, ends with ER. So let's take a look with their endings when we are going to conjugate the imperfect past tense. Alright. Comer, I used to eat.
Comía.
You used to eat.
Comías.
He or she used to eat.
Comía.
We used to eat.
Comíamos.
You, plural, you used to eat.
Comíais.
And they used to eat.
Comían.
Alright, do you notice something with their endings?
Sí.
How are we going to formulate the imperfect past tense for ER regular verbs?
Quitar y añadir ia.
Alright, so what are their terminals from the first person to the last person, singular and plural?
Ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, ian.
Alright, so those are their terminals or endings when we are going to formulate or conjugate the imperfect past tense for ER ending verbs. Comía, ia, comías, ias, you add ias, comía, ad ia, comíamos, ad iamos, comíais, ad iais, and comían, you add ian. Alright, what about for regular IR ending verbs? So these verbs end with IR or IR. So example, the verb to say or to tell.
Decir.
Decir. So to say something, we are going to use the verb decir. Okay, the first person.
Decía. Decías. Decía. Decíamos. Decíais. Decían.
Do you notice something with the ER and IR ending verbs? Are they almost the same when we formulate or conjugate their imperfect past tense?
Sí.
Alright, so for regular ER and IR ending verbs, we are going to use the same terminals or endings to form their imperfect past tense. The ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, and ian. Alright guys, so we are going to tackle the irregular conjugation of some verbs in the imperfect past tense. So there are three. So take note of these three irregular verbs. The first one is the be verb, like the is, and are. In Spanish is
Ser.
then the verb to go
Ir.
and the verb to see.
Ver.
So you have to take note of their conjugation, guys. Okay, for example, the first person for ser, yo,
Era.
tú,
Eras.
él, ella, usted,
Era.
nosotros,
Éramos.
vosotros,
Erais.
ellos, ellas, ustedes.
Eran.
Let's try to conjugate the second irregular verb in the imperfect past tense. Yo,
Iba.
tú,
Ibas.
él, ella, usted,
Iba.
nosotros,
Ibamos.
vosotros,
Ibais.
ellos, ellas, ustedes.
Iban.
Let's take the third irregular verb, ver, which means to see. Yo,
Veía.
tú,
Veías.
él, ella, usted,
Veía.
nosotros,
Veíamos.
vosotros,
Veíais.
and ellos, ellas, o ustedes.
Veían.
Alright, so these are the three irregular verbs in the imperfect past tense. So take note of this: ser, ir, and ver. Te pregunto, Lucrecia, ¿qué hacías los fines de semana?
Yo limpiaba la casa.
You used to clean the house. Muchas gracias a todos. Adiós.
Adiós, hasta luego.
Chao.